The river wasn't supposed to be there. That was the first thing Nancy thought when her headlight cut through the gray curtain of rain and found the road gone. Swallowed. The storm drain had surrendered hours ago, and now the entire lower stretch of Hongang Bridge Road was moving like something alive, dark water churning over the asphalt with a low, hungry groan. She should have turned back. Any reasonable person would have turned back. But Nancy had 7 more deliveries and 32 minutes to make them. And reasonable was a luxury that paid 9,000 Korean wons an hour couldn't afford. She killed the engine, pulled the orange vest tighter across her chest, as if the reflective strips could protect her from water, and that was when she saw her. A woman, old, silver-haired, standing knee-deep in the rushing flood like she had simply walked into it, arms outstretched, face tilted upward at the weeping sky. Not struggling, not screaming, just confused. The kind of loss that lives behind the eyes, not on a map. Nancy's stomach dropped. Someone left her here. She was already out of the saddle before the thought finished forming. Already wading in, cold water biting through her jeans to the bone. Already reaching, because that is what you do when you are nobody important in a city full of powerful people. You move when everyone else is still deciding whether it's worth the risk. I've got you. I've got you. The current pushed harder than it looked. It always did. Nancy dug her boots into the gravel bed beneath and locked her arms around the old woman's waist, pulling her close like she weighed nothing. She weighed almost nothing, and began the slow, brutal drag back toward the embankment. The woman clutched Nancy's arm with a grip that said her body, at least, still understood terror. They hit the muddy bank together, gasping. Nancy looked up, chest heaving, water streaming from her braids, and froze. 3 black sedans sat on the road above them, headlights blazing like the eyes of something ancient and predatory. Men in dark suits were already moving down the slope, hands reaching inside their jackets with the practiced quiet of people for whom violence was simply procedure. And at the center of it all, motionless at the top of the embankment, stood a man in a charcoal suit that the rain did not dare ruin. He was looking at his mother. Then he looked at Nancy. The men with their hands inside their jackets went very, very still. Because the most dangerous man in the city had just watched a delivery girl. Nobody, a ghost, a pair of hands that carried other people's things. Pull the only person he had ever loved back from the edge of the world. Nancy didn't know his name yet. She didn't know what his name made people do. She only knew that his expression was the most frightening thing she had ever seen. Not because it was cold, but because for one brief, unguarded second, it wasn't. It broke. And men like that, Nancy would soon learn, never forgave anyone who witnessed their breaking. Before we go any further, if you're new here, hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I want to say hello to every single one of you. Now let's get into it. The old woman's fingers were the first thing Nancy felt. Thin as bird bones, wrapped around her forearm with a strength that made no sense for a body that small. Yun Nari was trembling so hard her teeth clicked together, and the water was still pulling at both of them like it had an opinion about where they should end up. Nancy pulled harder. Her boots found gravel, then mud, then solid earth, and she dragged them both up the embankment in a tangle of soaked limbs and ragged breathing, collapsing onto her knees with the old woman pressed against her chest like something precious she had caught mid-fall. For 3 seconds, there was only the sound of rain and the rush of the river below them, and Nancy thought, okay. She's breathing. We're okay. Then she heard the doors, 4 of them, opening in sequence. The sound of expensive hinges and controlled movement, the particular silence of men who had been trained never to make noise when they moved. Nancy looked up through the curtain of her soaked braids and counted. 1, 2, 3, for figures coming down the slope in dark suits, and each of them had a hand resting on something beneath their jacket. Her body understood before her brain did. She pulled Nari tighter. Easy. The voice came from the top of the embankment, and every one of those 4 figures stopped as if a switch had been thrown. Nancy's eyes tracked upward past the blinding headlights of 3 black SUVs and found the man standing at the edge of the road, looking down at them. Song Yul. She did not know his name yet. She would learn it, but she registered him the way you register weather, not as a person, exactly, but as a condition. Something you had to account for or be destroyed by. He was tall in the way that had nothing to do with height, dressed in a charcoal suit that the Georgia rain had tried and failed to touch, and his face was doing something she had never seen a face do before. It was absolutely still and absolutely undone. He was looking at his mother. The woman Nancy held against her orange safety vest like a child, silver hair plastered flat, hands still shaking, eyes wide and clouded and far away in the manner of someone whose mind had taken a long detour from the present. One of the suited men said something low in Korean. Song-yeol raised one hand, barely a gesture, a centimeter of movement, and the man went quiet. Then Song-yeol walked down the slope himself. He crouched in front of them both, and this close Nancy could see that his eyes, dark, deep-set, the kind of eyes that had calculated the weight of things she would never want to understand, were fixed on his mother's face with an expression that lived somewhere between agony and relief. "Yama," he said softly. The old woman stirred, blinked, turned her head toward his voice like a flower finding a window. "Yala," she murmured, as if she had simply been waiting for him in the rain. Song-yeol reached out and touched her cheek. One brief, careful touch, the kind of tenderness that a man like him probably only allowed himself in the dark. And then he looked at Nancy. Really looked at her. Not the way men like him usually looked at people like her. Through them, past them, cataloging their utility and finding it insufficient. He looked at her as if he was seeing her for the first time and was still deciding what that meant for both of them. "What is your name?" he said. It was not a question. "Nancy." She did not flinch. She had been surviving men who looked like authority her entire life. "I'm a delivery driver. I saw her in the water and I know what you did." He stood. His suit was now streaked with mud at the knees and he did not look at it, which told her everything about the kind of man he was. He said something to his men in Korean and the four figures converged. Not on Nancy, but around Nari, lifting her with careful, practiced hands, wrapping a blanket around her that appeared from nowhere, guiding her toward the warmth of the nearest vehicle. Nancy started to stand. She would get her bike. She had 5 more deliveries. "Not yet," Song-yeol said. She looked at him. "She is still holding your jacket," he said. Nancy looked down. The old woman's hand had not released the hem of Nancy's orange vest. Even as the men tried to settle her into the car, Nari's grip held fast to the fabric, and her eyes, swimming with confusion and the aftermath of terror, kept searching for Nancy's face. Nancy felt something rearrange itself quietly in her chest. She got into the car. The estate sat behind iron gates tall enough to block out the Atlanta skyline, and as the motorcade rolled through them, Nancy counted 3 camera angles on the gate alone, 2 guards whose posture said military, and 1 very large dog that did not bark, and somehow that was worse. She had a system for new places. Delivery work taught you that every house, every building, every loading dock had a logic to it, a pattern. You learned it fast or you wasted time. She was already reading this one before the car stopped. The inside of the main house looked like someone had taken a luxury hotel and asked it to be more serious. Dark wood, high ceilings, the kind of quiet that was enforced rather than natural. Nari had fallen into a shallow sleep against Nancy's shoulder somewhere on the drive, and Nancy had let her, one hand resting lightly on the old woman's silver hair, because she did not know what else to do, and it seemed to help. A woman, mid-30s, severe bun, eyes like a compliance officer, met them at the door and explained that a room had been prepared for Mrs. Yun. She said it in English that was precise and slightly too formal, the English of someone who had learned it entirely from documents. "And for the girl," Song-yeol said behind Nancy, "the East guest suite." Nancy turned around. "I can't stay. I have a job. I have a bike that is currently sitting in a flooded road. Your bike has been retrieved." He was already handing his jacket to someone. Not looking at her. "Your deliveries have been handled." She stared at him. "You had someone complete my deliveries." "In the past 20 minutes, yes." "You don't even know what company I work for." "I know everything about the people who come through my gate, Nancy." He finally looked at her, and there was something that was almost patience in it, though she suspected patience was not something that came naturally to him. "You are a witness. You were at the river. You held my mother while my men were pointing weapons at you. This puts you in a position that requires management." She knew what that word could mean. She held his gaze and did not let herself think about it too hard. "Are you threatening me?" The silence was long enough to make her heartbeat become something she was aware of. "I am telling you," he said carefully, "that the safest place for you tonight is inside this house. Beyond these walls, the people who let my mother wander into a flooded river are still in this city. And they may have seen your face." Nancy opened her mouth. Closed it. She was 26 years old. She had grown up in Vine City. She had watched her mother work 2 jobs and her brother navigate systems designed to discard him. And she had built herself into someone who survived by reading situations faster than they could read her. This situation was reading. "Stay. I want my own room," she said. "With a lock. There is a biometric lock on the East Suite door. Your thumbprint will be registered in the next 10 minutes. And I want to call my cousin, to tell her I'm alive. You may use any phone in the house. And tomorrow morning." "Tomorrow," he said, with a finality that closed the conversation like a door. "We will discuss tomorrow." She picked up the dry towel a staff member was offering her and walked toward the stairs. She was halfway up when she heard him say, quietly, to no one in particular, or perhaps to himself, something in Korean that she did not understand. She would look it up later on her phone, translating the syllables she had memorized phonetically. She did not run. She would think about that for a long time. By morning, the only person in the entire estate that Yun Nari would allow near her was Nancy. Not the private nurse Song-yeol had called in at 4 a.m. Not the soft-spoken Korean woman on staff who brought warm barley tea and spoke to Nari in the language she had grown up in. Not even her own son, who stood in the doorway of her suite with an expression that he had locked down to something unreadable, but which Nancy, who had grown up watching her mother try not to cry, recognized immediately. It was the particular stillness of someone who did not want to make things worse by showing how much it hurt. Nari wanted Nancy. She kept reaching for her hand, kept looking toward the door whenever Nancy left the room to use the bathroom, anxious until she returned. The nurse had explained, quietly and with clinical gentleness, that Yun Nari's dementia had progressed significantly in recent months, that she moved in and out of clarity the way a radio moved in and out of signal, sometimes sharp and present, sometimes deep in some other decade entirely. The trauma of the river had not helped. But she remembered Nancy's face. Nancy did not have a degree. She had never worked in a hospital or a care facility. What she had was her grandmother, who had lived with them for the last 4 years of her life, and whose mind had done the same slow drift that Nari's was doing now. That same drifting away from the edges of the present. That same clutching toward anything that felt familiar and warm. She knew how to do this. She sat on the edge of Nari's bed and talked to her in a low, even voice about nothing important. The weather outside, which had cleared overnight into a pale January blue. The breakfast tray, which had small portions of rice porridge, and something that smelled like her grandmother's kitchen and made Nancy's chest ache with a complicated longing. She described the color of the curtains. She hummed once a melody she didn't even know the name of, just something her mother used to hum while folding laundry, and Nari closed her eyes and her breathing slowed. She did not notice Song-yeol until he shifted in the hallway. He was standing just outside the open door, one shoulder against the frame, and he had been there long enough that his coffee had stopped steaming. He was watching his mother sleep with the expression of a man taking inventory of something he was afraid to lose count of. When he realized Nancy had seen him, he did not move. Most men in his position, she thought, would have straightened up, would have arranged their face into something more authoritative. He just looked at her steadily, and she looked back at him, and for the first time since the river it felt less like 2 strangers in opposing positions and more like 2 people who had accidentally walked into the same quiet room. She looked back at Nari, adjusted the blanket. Later, she would think, that was the moment it started. Not the river, not the gate, the hallway, the cold coffee, his face in the doorway undisguised. By the 3rd day, Nancy knew the layout of the estate better than most of the staff. This was not because she was snooping, she told herself that carefully, more than once, but because movement was how her brain worked. She thought on her feet. She processed through her body. And caring for Nari meant navigating the house. The kitchen for warm things, the garden when the old woman wanted air, the library when she needed quiet stimulation that wasn't a screen. And so Nancy walked. And because she had spent years moving through buildings that belonged to other people, delivering things to spaces where she was expected to be efficient and invisible. She noticed things. She noticed that the camera on the east corridor rotated on a 45-second cycle instead of the 60 she'd clocked on every other corridor. A glitch or a deliberate blind spot. She noticed that the door connecting the service entrance to the main wing, which should have required a keycard, drifted open if you pulled it from a certain angle before the latch fully caught. It had probably been like that for months. The staff walked past it a dozen times a day and had stopped seeing it. She noticed one of the guards, the one they called Quan, broad-shouldered, always on the south gate rotation, took a phone call every evening at 7:45 that lasted exactly 4 minutes. He walked to the same spot each time, the far corner of the motor court, angled away from the main cameras. And when he came back, his walk was different. Tighter, like a man carrying a thing he was pretending not to carry. She noticed because she had grown up noticing. Because noticing was the skill nobody paid you for, that you developed by being the kind of person the world assumed was just furniture. She said nothing. She went back to Nari's room and helped her with her evening tea and watched a nature documentary about Korean coastal birds that Nari found deeply comforting for reasons she could not articulate, and Nancy sat beside her on the small sofa and turned the volume down and thought, "Something is wrong in this house." And she was already inside it. He found her in the garden after midnight. She had not been able to sleep. This was becoming a pattern, and had wrapped herself in the heaviest robe the East Suite closet contained, and taken her tea outside to where the cold could be brisk and honest rather than just air-conditioned and artificial. The grounds were lit with low landscape lighting that made everything look like a stage set, beautiful and slightly unreal. Song-yeol appeared from the direction of his office wing. She recognized the direction from the way the light fell, and did not seem surprised to find her there. He sat down on the far end of the stone bench without asking, and for several minutes said nothing. She was not afraid of silence. She waited. "She asked for you by name today," he said. "Before she asked for me." "I know." She looked at her tea. "I'm sorry." "Don't be." His voice had no bitterness in it, which surprised her. She always reaches toward warmth first. She was like that my whole life. She would talk to strangers at bus stops for 40 minutes while I stood beside her trying to disappear. Something almost like a smile moved across his face and was gone. I hated it when I was a boy. I thought it made her vulnerable. Nancy looked at him. "Did it?" A long pause. "Yes," he said. "But it also made her the reason I had any softness in me at all. However much of that remains." She did not know what to say to that. She looked out at the dark garden. "I was 12 when my father died," he said, and she understood without being told that this was not something he said to people. That the dark and the hour and whatever strange gravity had settled around the two of them since the river were the only reasons the words were coming out at all. After that, keeping her alive was the only metric I had for whether I was doing anything right. Everything else, the business, the territory, the reputation, he paused. It was all in service of that. Of making sure nothing could ever touch her. "And something almost did," Nancy said quietly. "Yes." His jaw tightened. "And it was not an accident. The flooding of that road. The gates that were left unlocked. She was wandering because someone wanted her to wander." He looked at Nancy then, directly, and she felt the weight of it. "I do not yet know who. But I will." Nancy thought about Quan. About the camera on the east corridor. About the door that didn't latch. She was not ready to say it yet. She did not know what telling him would set in motion, and she needed to understand the shape of the thing before she handed it to a man who solved problems the way she suspected Song-yeol solved them. "She's safe right now," Nancy said instead. "That's what matters tonight." He looked at her for a long moment, and she watched him decide to accept that. "Yes," he said. "Tonight." He stood to leave. Then stopped. "Why did you get in the water?" he said without turning around. "You did not know her. You had no reason." Nancy considered the question seriously, the way it deserved. "She was scared and she was alone," she said finally. "I've been both of those things. I didn't like seeing it on someone else." He stood in the dark for a moment longer. Then he went inside. "Hey, if you are still with me, drop a comment right now telling me where in the world you are reading from. And if you have not liked and subscribed yet, do it now, because what happens next changes everything. Let us keep going." She heard it on the fourth night. She had gone down to the kitchen at 11 for warm water. She had a habit from her grandmother's house, warm water before bed, boring and effective. And she took the long way back because the long way passed the south corridor, and the south corridor past the alcove near the motor court entrance where Quan always stood for his 7:45 call. Except tonight it was 11 and he was there again, and his voice was lower than usual, and she stopped. She pressed herself flat against the wall before she even made the decision to do it. Her body remembered doorways and blind spots the way other people remembered words. He was speaking in Korean. She caught none of it, but she recognized three things regardless of language. She recognized the tone of a man giving information to someone who frightened him. She recognized the word Quan because it was the only English word in the stream, said twice with the emphasis of an address rather than a name. And she recognized the moment his call ended and he exhaled, a long, deflating sound, the way you exhaled after handing something dangerous to someone else. She was back upstairs before he turned around. She sat on the edge of her bed in the dark and let her brain work. The flood had been engineered. Song-yeol had said as much. Someone inside the estate had helped loosen the perimeter around Nari, had made sure the old woman could wander far enough to be in danger. And that someone was feeding information to a rival syndicate that apparently wanted the Quan line erased from Atlanta entirely. Quan was not the head of it. He was too frightened to be the head of it. He was a thread. But threads, Nancy knew from the many times she had helped her brother untangle impossible problems, were where you started pulling. She needed to tell Song-yeol. And she needed to do it before Quan realized she had heard him. Because if Quan realized, if whoever was above Quan realized, then Nari was not the only person in this house who was in danger. She got up, put on shoes, walked down the hall toward the office wing. She knocked. The door opened 11 seconds later. Song-yeol was still dressed, which told her he had not slept either, which meant that whatever calculation he had been running in his head since the garden was still not finished. Quan, she said. South corridor. 11 p.m. call. He went very still. And the door in the service entrance that doesn't latch, she said. And the camera glitch on the east corridor. They're all related. She paused. I think your house has already been walked through by whoever is coming. The look that moved across Song-yeol's face was not the one she expected. She had been bracing herself for something frightening. The cold, executive fury of a man whose authority had been violated. What she saw instead was something faster and more purposeful than fury. It was clarity. He pulled out a phone, made one call. 6 words, Korean, clipped quiet, and the entire character of the house changed without making a sound. You should go back to your room, he said. I should stay with Nari. A beat. Then, yes. He was already moving. Stay with Nari. The attack came at 3:47 a.m. Not through the front gate. Song-yeol had already locked it down, the guards repositioned, the perimeter doubled. They came through the service entrance, through the door that didn't latch. Nancy heard the sound before she understood it. A percussion, distant and staccato, somewhere on the ground floor, and then the house's emergency lights flooded everything in red and Nari sat bolt upright in bed with a cry that cut straight through Nancy's chest. Hey, look at me. Nancy was already at her side, both hands on the old woman's face, steady, voice low. Look at my eyes. You're okay. You're with me. Remember me? Nancy. I've got you. Nari focused on her face, grabbed her wrists. Her breathing was terrified, but she was present, clear in a way she sometimes wasn't, the fear burning through the fog. We have to move, Nancy said. She had already thought about this. 3 days of walking this house, counting exits, reading sightlines. She had already thought about this in the back of her mind without letting herself name why. Because knowing exits was just how her brain worked. Because she had always lived in a world where knowing the way out was survival. There was a delivery crate, a large foam-lined equipment case, the kind that some of Song-yeol's staff used to transport secure items, in the storage room 2 doors down. She had noticed it on day 2. She had noticed it was exactly large enough. She got Nari into slippers and a heavy robe and put one arm around her, and they moved. The gunfire was louder now. Closer. She heard shouting in Korean and then a crash, glass somewhere below, and then the particular silence of a pause in a fight, which was somehow worse than the noise. The storage room. The crate. Nari looked at it and looked at Nancy, and Nancy saw the moment the old woman understood what was being asked. I know, Nancy said softly. I know it's small. I'm going to stay right beside it the whole time. I am not leaving you. Do you hear me? I'm not going anywhere. Nari cupped Nancy's face in both hands. A gesture that was startlingly clear, startlingly maternal. The gesture of someone who was fully present for one crucial moment. And then she nodded and let Nancy help her in. Nancy had the lid mostly closed when the door opened. Her whole body seized. But it was Song-Yul. His jacket was gone. His shirt had a tear at the shoulder, and there was a cut above his eyebrow that he had not bothered to address. He took in the scene in one look, the crate, Nancy's position beside it, the route she had clearly already planned to the service exit. There's a bike in the motor court, he said, breathing hard. Modified. Sidecar. He looked at her. Can you ride? I have been riding delivery bikes in Atlanta traffic since I was 19, she said. Yes, I can ride. Something moved in his face that she did not have time to interpret. Then we go, he said. The streets were still half drowned. The storm had passed but left its consequences behind. Water lying in sullen pools across the low roads, debris pushed against curbs, traffic lights blinking orange at empty intersections. Atlanta at 4 a.m. looked like a city that had been quietly evacuated, and Nancy rode through it like she had been born for exactly this, because in some ways she had. She knew these roads. She knew which underpasses flooded soonest, which side streets had the highest crown, which back routes the GPS didn't bother with because they required local knowledge to navigate. She had ridden all of them, in rain and in dark, in summer heat and January cold, because the packages did not care about the conditions and neither had her rent. Song-Yul sat in the sidecar with Nari cradled against his side, one arm around her, his other hand braced against the frame. He had not told her where they were going. She had not asked. She was navigating on instinct and on the information he gave her in short, directional sentences. Left, the warehouse district, the blue building on Pryor, and she followed it the way she followed dispatch instructions, quickly and without drama. Nari, impossibly, had fallen asleep. Or something close to sleep, a state of exhausted surrender, her silver head resting against her son's chest, her breathing steady. And Song-Yul held her with both arms now, the bike vibrating beneath them, Atlanta's damaged skyline reflected in the standing water around them. And for a few minutes in the dark Nancy could hear him talking to his mother very quietly in Korean, a low and continuous murmur that was not meant for anyone else. She kept her eyes on the road. She did not know what he was saying. She suspected he was telling his mother she was safe. She suspected he was telling her some version of what her own mother used to say during the bad nights of her childhood. I have you. I'm not going anywhere. You are not alone in this. She drove faster, to give them what privacy the night allowed. The blue building on Pryor was a secondary location that only 4 people knew about. Song-Yul told her this when they pulled into the underground garage, and she helped Nari out of the sidecar, and she noted that one of those 4 had apparently been Kwon, which was the mistake that had put them all in a flooded vehicle at 4 in the morning. And she could see him making that calculation with the particular precision of someone who did not make the same error twice. But they were inside. The building was warm. Nari was alive and breathing and asking, in a small confused voice, if there was any rice. Nancy laughed, unexpected, sudden, slightly unhinged with relief, and Song-Yul looked at her, and the corner of his mouth moved in something that might, under other circumstances, have been the beginning of a smile. There is rice, he said to his mother. We'll find you rice. It took 3 days to finish it. Nancy was not privy to all of it. She stayed with Nari in the blue building on Pryor, while Song-Yul handled what needed to be handled, which she understood involved Kwon and the people above Kwon and the rival syndicate that had believed, incorrectly, that a manufactured flood and a few compromised guards were sufficient to end a bloodline that had survived 3 generations of harder things than this. She heard pieces. She did not ask for more. What she focused on was Nari. She focused on the rice porridge she learned to make from a YouTube video at 5 in the morning, tasting it repeatedly until it was close enough. She focused on the nature documentaries and the hand-holding and the slow, steady work of being a constant presence for someone whose world kept shifting beneath her. On the third morning, Nari looked at her during a clear window and said in careful English, "You are not afraid of him." Nancy considered this. "I didn't say that. But you stayed." The old woman's eyes were sharp and warm at once. "People who are afraid of my son always leave when they can. You had chances. You didn't take them." Nancy was quiet for a moment. "I didn't leave because of you," she said. Nari patted her hand with the authority of someone who knew the difference between honesty and the complete truth. "I know," she said. "And also not only because of me." She said nothing else and went back to the birds on the television, and Nancy stared at the middle distance and did not argue. Song Yul returned on the evening of the third day. He walked through the door looking like a man who had been thorough about something and was now very tired. He went to his mother first, always his mother first, and then he came and found Nancy in the small kitchen, where she was making tea. He set something on the counter beside her. It was a coin. Old, she thought. Heavy. A small character etched on one face that she would later learn was the Kwan family's mark, used across 40 years and 2 continents as a signature and a warning. She looked at it, then at him. "I don't want payment," she said. "It is not payment." His voice was very quiet. Payment would be an insult. This is recognition. He paused. Every business in this city, every establishment, every person who operates under any agreement with the Kwan name, they will know that seal. They will know that whoever carries it does so with my authority behind them. She looked at the coin for a long time. "What does that mean for me practically?" she said, because she was a practical person and she needed to understand the shape of things. "It means," he said, "that you are the most protected woman in Atlanta." A pause. "It means that no door in this city will be closed to you. No one will follow you. No one will threaten you. No one will attempt, ever again, to make you invisible." His eyes were steady on hers. "Because you are not invisible. You have not been since the river. I simply want to make sure the rest of this city understands what I already know." Nancy picked up the coin. It was heavier than she expected. "I still have my job," she said. "Yes. I still do my routes. If you want to." He said it like he meant it. Not like an indulgence, but like a genuine acknowledgement that her life was her own to construct. "Then I'll keep the coin," she said. "But I'm not carrying it for you. I'm carrying it for me." He looked at her for a long moment. Then, and it was brief and she almost missed it, he smiled. Not the partial, dangerous thing she had seen at the edges of his expressions before. A real one. Unexpected. Young-looking. "Yes," he said. "That is the correct way to carry it. Listen, before we get to the final chapter, I need you to stop and comment where you are watching from right now. I mean it, drop your city, your country, your time zone. I love hearing from you. Like this story if you have not, subscribe if you are new, and let us finish this together." 6 weeks after the river. The estate had been cleaned and quietly reorganized, the staff reduced, the security restructured, the East Corridor camera fixed. 3 people had been removed from the Kwan organization with the particular finality that such removals implied. The rival syndicate had been made to understand, through methods Nancy chose not to inquire about, that the Kwan line was not a thing to be washed away. Atlanta went back to its complicated, glittering, uneven self. Nancy went back to her routes. She rode them differently now. Not because anything had changed about the roads or the packages or the dispatch voice in her earpiece. All of that was the same. But she was different inside it. She was not smaller, not invisible, not a ghost moving through the edges of other people's lives. She moved through the city like someone who knew that she belonged to it. Not because a man with power had told her so, but because she had always belonged to it, and the river had simply made her remember. She kept the coin in the inner pocket of her delivery jacket, against her chest, where it was warm. On a Thursday evening in February, when the last of the cold had broken into something cautious and new, she arrived at the estate. Not for a delivery. She had not been there on a delivery since that first night. She had come because Nari had asked for her, via a message relayed through the precise compliance officer woman who had become, over 6 weeks, something approaching warm. She had come because she wanted to. She found them on the balcony, Nari in a heavy wrap, face turned toward the early evening light with the pleasure of a woman who understood that light was not guaranteed, and Song Yul beside her, in a dark sweater that was the most informal she had ever seen him, holding a cup of tea he was not drinking. Nari saw her and reached out immediately, and Nancy went to her, and the old woman took her hand and held it and said in Korean, something that made Song Yul's jaw move with the effort of not reacting. "What did she say?" Nancy asked. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "She said that you are the daughter the river sent her." Nancy looked out at Atlanta spread below them. Its light and its sprawl, its history and its contradictions, the streets she had ridden through in dark and in rain and in heat, invisible and essential and always moving. She was not in her vest tonight. She wore a silk blouse Nari had sent to the guest's suite 3 weeks ago with a note that said simply, "For when you come back." She had not been sure she would come back, and then she had been sure, and then she had been here. She felt Song Yul move to stand beside her at the railing. "She's right," Nancy said quietly. She was not sure if she meant Nari's words or something else. Maybe both. She felt his hand, careful, deliberate, unhurried, settle beside hers on the railing. Not over it. Beside it. As if he understood that this was how you approach someone like Nancy. With patience. With room. With the acknowledgement that she would reach when she was ready and not a moment before. She looked at his hand. Then at the city. Then, slowly, she moved hers until they were touching. The light changed. Atlanta glittered. Nari hummed something soft and wordless behind them, the melody of some other time, and Nancy stood on a balcony above the city she had helped save, holding the edge of something that was still becoming itself. She had started that night as a girl trying to make her quota in the rain. She had carried an old woman out of a flood. She had read a house like a map. She had heard a traitor in a dark corridor and reported him, and ridden through flooded streets at 4 a.m, and refused a tip from the most powerful man in Atlanta because she was not invisible furniture and had never been. She had made the thunder. Now she was learning to enjoy the calm. And that is where we pause today. Nancy went into that river as a nobody. At least, that is what the world had told her for 26 years. She came out of it as something the city of Atlanta would not forget. And Song Yul? The most feared man behind those iron gates? He met a girl in an orange safety vest who did not run from him, did not flatter him, and did not ask him for a single thing. And that, more than any territory or title, was the thing that finally cracked him open. This story is far from over. There are still questions that need answers. There are still people in this city who underestimated Nancy. And we both know what happens to people who underestimate her. And there is still whatever is quietly, carefully building between a delivery girl who carries a seal against her chest and a man who is learning, for the first time in his life, that power is not the same thing as strength. So here is what I need from you right now. If this story moved you, if Nancy made you feel something, if Nari's hand reaching for that orange vest gave you chills, if Song Yul's smile surprised you the way it surprised her, hit that like button right now. It costs you nothing, and it tells me to keep going. Subscribe if you are not already here, because the next chapter is coming, and you do not want to be the person who missed it. Hit the bell so YouTube actually tells you when it drops, because we both know the algorithm does what it wants otherwise. And the thing I look forward to most, drop a comment below telling me where in the world you are watching from. Your city, your country, your time zone, whatever you want to share. I read every single comment. I reply. I say hello. Because this story started with one woman refusing to walk past someone who needed help. And this community runs on exactly that same energy.